today or for watching the recording. Today's webinar is really going to be focused on Open.Epic and Epic interoperability a little more holistically to help groups prepare for the Finnish Health Data Hackathon coming up in January. So hopefully it should give you all the information you need, maybe get started with developing a sort of proof of concept integration with an Epic environment or starting to think about ways to integrate with Epic. So I think quick introductions. I'm Sean Hubbard, a software developer at Epic, and I'm joined by my colleague Josh, who's really integrations expert on the Epic side, and he'll probably run most of the show today, and I'll let him say a little bit more probably once he gets going. But on my side, I'm based here in Helsinki at the Epic office in Ruoholahti, and serve as kind of our overall R&D lead for Epic in Finland. Obviously, that involves working very closely with the Apotti team and system, including integration and interoperability needs. I'll also be at the Radical Health Festival and in and around the hackathon in January. So if you have Epic questions or you see me, feel free to say hi or pull me aside. Definitely look for this version of me with less hair. The screenshot in the PowerPoint is from, I think, my second day at Epic a little over 10 years ago. So if you look for that guy, you won't find him. Okay, so getting into, I think, what we'll cover today. I'll start with just a little bit of high-level background on kind of Epic's standards first approach to interoperability and data exchange. And then Josh will get into a bit more of the details on integrations with Epic, different capabilities, and kind of give a demo of the quick steps to register a client or app and start testing. And most of what we're going to show is also available online through the open.epic.com or fire.epic.com resources, including various guides on integrations with Epic and resources like that. Okay, so to start, kind of that high-level overview, I think interoperability is really core to Epic's approach to health and social care data and being an EHR. I think whether that's Epic tools like Care Everywhere being used to exchange patient records between health systems, or support for sort of existing standards, whether it's through development with HL7, IHE, and others, supporting those standards for exchanging data, whether it's with another Epic system or an external system. We know how important that is to providing good health and social care, is having that data accessible to both patients and other clinicians or social care users. And so I think in practice, when we look at something like Fire and implementation of Fire, it's an area where through open.epic we have over 500 Fire APIs that can be used to exchange data with an Epic system, which from our experience kind of working around the world is more than we've seen from other EHRs. And part of that, I think, is a reflection of the breadth of what Epic covers in terms of health and social care and various care settings, but also that kind of commitment to supporting those standards and supporting those integrations and interoperability. And I think a key maybe piece of all of this is Epic's approach to software delivery. We sort of take the mindset of having one code base worldwide. Of course, in practice, we have different members of the Epic community upgrading to versions on slightly different cadences. But at a macro level, it's really the same Epic code base released and implemented everywhere that Epic is used in the world. So I think 16 countries and growing. And what that means from an integration standpoint is that as you develop potentially an integration against an Epic resource that works in one Epic instance, that same API or resource is available in other Epic instances, and a lot of that work can be reapplied in those other environments. So it also, I think, helps create a really good framework for integrations scaling across the community. And not just, I think, Fire. I think when we look at the various forms of integration, and Josh will get into some of the details here in a second, but what we've seen that in practice mean is we have a tremendous volume of interface and integrations capabilities. So you can see over 368 billion interface messages annually across the Epic community, with over 2,600 different sort of third-party vendors and exchange partners, just as kind of a sense of scale and how this philosophy has manifested in real-world use. And so with that, I'll hand things over to Josh to get a little bit more into the details of how this goes in practice and what you'll need to know to start developing an integration with Epic as part of the hackathon or otherwise.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I'll go ahead and take the screen here. Let's see, you guys should be able to see this in about a second. You got it, Sean? Thumbs up? Cool.
Yes, I see it.
All right. My name is Josh Freeby. I work for Epic on the integration team. My primary role is technical support and implementation designs. So I help set up, test, and deploy and support integrations at Epic customers. I'm focused on a lot of our EU customers, including Apotti in Finland. I'm going to talk today about a couple of different integration technologies that we have, some quick steps to get up and running, as well as kind of when we would use different tools in the integration toolbox. So like Sean mentioned before, I think your first stop for data exchange should be open.epic.com. You can type this in a browser, and it's kind of our launching off point for a lot of our different interop tools, including, like Sean mentioned, Fire APIs. We've got 500 plus for the different APIs that we have support for on the Epic side. We also have a lot of other integration standards. You probably know about Fire, but there's also HL7, DICOM, X12, dozens more that are not listed here, as well as our own proprietary things where we couldn't find a standard for these. The point is there is a lot of tools in the interoperability toolkit. So we designed open.epic.com to be self-service. So if you go there, there's a lot of guides that will help you figure out what makes sense for you, as well as we've recently launched what we call playbooks that help you figure out for specific flavors of use cases. For example, getting a patient summary out of Epic, what tools might make sense there. Just to mention a couple common examples. So we have what is called a Smart EHR launch. If you go on Google and you find the Smart spec, you can find more information on that. And that is kind of a case where you can have your app launched directly from Epic with a context that tells your app basically which patient encounter are in focus, and also can do a kind of like single sign-on thing. So imagine either a provider in Epic logged into something, they click a button, launch out to your app. That app is authenticated from Epic's, or it is kind of relying on Epic's authentication, and also it gets access to data from Epic to support your app. And it can be kind of embedded workflow experience. Same thing can be done from the patient side. You as a patient can decide to release your data to a third party, for example, Apple Health or other apps like that, in order to take control of your own health. Other two examples I'll mention is we have a spec called CDS hooks. These are checkpoints in a clinician's workflow, such as when they're queuing up and signing an order. We can run Fire queries, or your app can basically do different decision support checks, such as checking med interactions, or suggesting a suggested alternative drug to order for the clinician. And that's supported by Fire queries on interoperability. So that's a couple random examples of what we can do here. I'm going to talk a bit more about one spot of Open.Epic that will help you, which is the data exchange tutorial. This is one of the many sources of information that will help you make your interop with Epic successful. And kind of what we see as this tool's goal here is to provide the right knowledge for you to find the right interop tools to support data exchange for your use case. There's a lot of technology choice available, but we really want to start with like, what is the use case you're trying to solve? If you're designing integration, you first kind of the first step you want to understand is what is the type of data I'm exchanging here? Am I interested in financial data, provider data, registration? Let's take, for example, I want to exchange appointment information. So that's kind of the type of data I want to exchange. And then you want to think a bit more deeper. What is the type of appointment data that I'm looking for? Maybe appointment type, MRI appointment versus like a primary care appointment. What are the specific data elements I need, like appointment time, location, et cetera. So that's kind of step one. After that, you also want to think, what is the direction of exchange? Do I want to get appointment data out of Epic in order to, let's say, send patients appointment reminders? Or do I want to schedule appointments into Epic, for example, to make sure that the chart in Epic is complete with all the appointments that are scheduled elsewhere? Of course, when we're taking data into our system, we want to take time and care to make sure that data is accurate because it's being shown to doctors. So we have validation processes, et cetera, to make sure that any data we're bringing into the system is filing appropriately. But there's a higher bar of quality in that case compared to just reading data. So let's say you've identified a data set. I want to have appointment information out of Epic, direction of data exchange. Let's say I want to populate my app with the appointments that exist in Epic. Then you need to determine which specific technology of those are the most applicable. Like I said earlier, we have a lot of different integration technologies available. Fire is one tool in the toolbox, but there are many tools. And I think the point here is when you're designing new integration, start with the use case. Don't try to start with the specific technology. And I'll talk about kind of two different examples of interop methods that we support today and when I might think of using both. But the point is here is if you want to use Fire for everything, for example, there's going to be some other tools in the toolkit that you might want to think of are a better fit for solving a given problem than just the Fire APIs. And you can end up with a bad experience by going first with the technology rather than thinking through like what is my use case's needs. There's two examples how this can go poorly. So we have, and I'll explain this in a second, we have an outgoing appointment interface that is event-based that will send you all appointments, let's say appointment events corresponding to new appointments created. If your app just wants, for example, like one patient's appointments, that is going to be a fire hose of information that your data might not want to need, or you're going to add a lot of complexity into try to figuring out, like, from all the set of appointments, how do I filter down to just those that I care about? Similarly, if your goal is to keep a schedule in sync, so to have all of the scheduling events coming out of Epic into your app, and probably that's a best fit for an event-based interface when a new a new appointment is created in Epic that will flow to your system, a list of events as those are scheduled, so that you can have a sync database with the appointments matching on both sides. However, if you try to do that same thing with our Fire APIs, like I'll say in a second, all of our Fire APIs are query-based. So if you want to do that same thing from a query-based perspective, you could potentially have to query like hundreds or thousands of times a day just to check if any new appointments have been created. So anyways, the point is think through your use case and let the technology follow. So the first example I want to talk about is what we call our interfaces. Really, these are HL7, primarily HL7 v2 interfaces meant for event-based triggering. So here's a couple examples. This is not exhaustive. These are primarily useful, like, for example, when you need real-time data. For example, the first one on the list here is outgoing appointment scheduling. As I mentioned a few slides ago, these APIs can be incoming or outgoing, but these are primarily event-driven interfaces, which are useful for when you want to maintain synchronization with, for example, the entire appointment list or schedule in Epic. This is probably the right option if you want to do Yeah, right. Like maintain synchronization with the schedules. So every appointment scheduled in Epic is available in your third party. These integrations have also been around for a long time, which means they are pretty mature and robust with a lot of support by Epic and the customer and vendor community. So this is a couple common use cases. Like I mentioned, appointment. We also have what we call outgoing ADT, which is how to keep your system up to date with patient demographic changes, where the patient is in the hospital, as well as more workflow type cases like blood transfusions or medication ordering. So again, with these common interfaces, the trade-off here is if you're, for example, subscribing to an outgoing appointment scheduling interface, you need to keep up with all of these messages to maintain synchronization. So that may be more than your application is interested in. You might want to say, for example, I want my one patient's list of appointments for next week. If you go with this API or the internet interface approach, you'll get all of the appointments all the time, and you'll have to filter down which of those set. What is the set of appointments that I care about? So it's important to pick the right tool for the job there, which is then going to lead me to another set of tools we have, which is our FHIR resources. You might know this, but FHIR, or the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources Standard, is an international API standard published by HL7 for modular healthcare data exchange. This is based on resources, which I'll get to in a second. This standard has a lot of support worldwide. There's lots of people in the healthcare IT space looking at FHIR. I expect many of you here today are interested in the FHIR spec. You can get a lot of usage out of this resource-based exchange, which is why we have a lot of different traffic on our FHIR interfaces. I think 138 billion FHIR messages the last year, and this is climbing every year. To explain a bit how this works in comparison with the prior example of what I call event-based interfaces, our FHIR APIs are primarily request-driven, meaning you query Epic for the FHIR data for a given set of search parameters. Please give me this patient's appointments. Primarily request-based query APIs that are available from Epic. So basically, you ask what is the current status of the chart. If you want to know, for example, when things in Epic change, you want to look at the prior set. But if you want to know what is the active status right now of a given entity, let's say an appointment, then you want to look at FHIR APIs. Like I said, primarily query, but we also have support for bulk FHIR standard. For example, if you want to retrieve large amounts of data, for example, 1,000 patients formatted as FHIR resources, we've got tooling for that, as well as a new FHIRcast standard, which is used to keep two different applications looking at the same patient, for example. Another benefit on the FHIR resources side is this is very popular globally. So if you make your app work with FHIR resources, you're set up pretty well to work with other EHRs that are developing to those same FHIR resources. This is a common standard with a lot of usage. I will give a caveat, though, that while we try our best to follow the interoperability, the international standard, there are cases where Epic's deployment of FHIR is different from what you may find elsewhere. And that's why it's important to look through our specific documentation for how our FHIR APIs work, which I'll show in a second. Another tool that I want to mention on open.epic.com is the data sharing playbooks. We've made about 40 of these recently, and this is kind of, I would say, different use cases where you would apply the sets of tools that we have towards your use cases. There's examples for patient application accesses. For example, if you have a patient app that wants to remind patients when to take their meds or help explain to them what their meds are doing. There are cases like that, as well as other common scenarios like alert managers, where you have an application that is monitoring patient vitals, and then if something goes critical, we want to send a notification into Epic. So that's a common case. We've got a lot of playbooks in here, about 40. These highlight proven approaches for common data sharing use cases, either on the patient side or on the provider side. A lot of good, useful information there. Okay, so I'm going to get into some of the nitty gritty here. And I'm going to kind of say, I'm going to explain first the quick and easy way to get up and running with Epic's Fire APIs at, let's say, a like prototype scale. Then I'm also going to say at the end a bit of how do you get more on a production ready track to develop your app further into being adopted by one of our customers. So first, a bit on our Fire API calls and structures. So if you go, another second site to remember is fire.epic.com. Here we have listed a bunch of our Fire APIs. Here's an example of one of them. A bit on the naming convention. So we have observation on the left side. That is the resource. There are many of these in the Fire spec. Observation is one of them. We have .read, which is the action. We also have .search or .create in some cases. So this is our observation reading API. And then some resources in Fire have multiple data content within them. So we have also a sub-resource. The observation resource is also used for lab results as well as vital signs. So in this case, we have a sub-resource that lists this out or denotes this specifically as a vital sign API. And then we have the Fire version. R4 is our workhorse right now, so I would primarily recommend going with R4, but we also have prior versions available. Once you click on these, and again, this is all available in fire.epic.com, open and available. You can create a public account to get some of the extra features, but all of it is available without any cost, just with a click-through agreement. So here's an example of what our documentation will look like for the observation.read resource. So here's some information about basically how our API behaves. At the top, you'll see a description of the API, which you know right away what you're looking for. But you also can see this helpful URL template and HTTP method, which will tell you basically what is the structure of the API call you need to get our information. Like I said before, we have request parameters, and this is, I am querying Epic. What are the search parameters I can use to get data? So, for example, I want this patient's vital signs. You would use this patient search parameter. A thing that I find is useful here is look at the is optional field. Many of these are conditional, but if you want to get up and running quickly with an API, you just want to fill the required fields. These will have is optional equals true. So you can get quickly up and running. We also have additional filter parameters. So vital signs, for example, those are often high volume. You might have a patient app that is taking a vital signal every hour, which means you've got a lot of data to sort through. And for those reasons, we have additional filter parameters that can filter you down to specific sets of vitals. For example, I am only interested in the patient's blood glucose value. And I can add a combo code parameter to only get those, or component codes. So this is basically, it's implemented on our side as a post filter request element, but from your side, it's a parameter that you send incoming into the API to say what kind of data you want back. So this is a lot of information to process, and this is where we're going to get to my favorite feature, which is the try it button in the top right. You can get to this on fire.epic.com as soon as you create a free account. This is very useful because it will actually connect to our actual open test environment that is available from the open internet that you can play with. And here you can see not just here's what the API structure looks like, but here is the actual data from one of our test servers. So you can try it out. You can play with the different request parameters, see how the API behaves, all in a simple web client. And this is a great way to get up and running quickly. So I'm going to show you a quick example of this so that you can get up and running with your apps. So like I said, we've got open.epic.com here. By the way, pausing for a second. Sean, can you read this? Should I go a little bigger?
I'd go a little bigger.
Okay, cool. So I recommend starting, like I said, we've got a lot of great documentation here. I recommend starting on the Fire side with fire.epic.com. And this will list all of the many resources that we support with that naming convention I mentioned earlier. I'm actually going to go in a, Gonna go, okay, we're gonna stick through with this. So if you log in with a simple user login here, I've got Epic User Web, but you'll be able to create a simple account here to get your authentication through. Simple and free to make. And here you can say on fire.epic.com, and you'll see our sandbox, and you'll see here all of the APIs that are available. I want to show vital signs like I was looking at before. So here I have observation.read vital signs, remembering that naming convention we have earlier. And then I want to show specifically the try it button. So here you can say, here we've got some of these request parameters that are in use here. And we can try it out, and we can see here is our test server populated with data and responding with the Fire JSON data that you're looking for. On some of the other ones, you can have more request parameters and play with things. But yeah, this kind of helps you understand how our API behaves alongside our documentation. Another thing I want to mention here is, so this is just a web side. This is your web client hitting our backend. But if you want to try this on your own machine, I also recommend clicking this raw request button. And here you can see a temporarily generated access token that can allow you to hit these APIs on your own system. This will usually last for an hour or so. But what I like to do, and this is kind of where it gets to the easy prototype version of getting APIs up and running with Epic, is take this token. It will last for an hour, play around with it in something like Postman. I'll show that in a second. I'll show the more production-ready way to get a client record and get your own OAuth 2 tokens so that you can hit our APIs with your own server and start testing things closer to production. But for right now, I'm just going to show the quick and easy way, which is you've got basically the whole API content here, so you can copy this and make it work on your local machine. You may be familiar with API tools such as Postman or Bruno that are useful here. I'm going to take one example as just in the Postman. So here I'm going to replicate this API on my local machine so I can show you how you can get up and running and start playing around with things. So here we have the HTTP method. It's HTTP get on this URL. I can copy this straight into my Postman environment. I can put this URL in here, same way that it is there. I'll create a case here. Let's see, I'll make this bigger. All right. So one part is the URL. The other part is the authorization. So depending on your different client application, Postman and Bruno have options for bearer token. Here you can just paste this information in on this bearer token and basically get up and running with your own workflows. You can send this across, and here we see response data coming from Epic. This will work for many of our different APIs on open.epic.com. So you can get up and running quickly, and for example, click some of these, you can change the URL to work with these other links. So you can say, okay, I want to go to practitioner, I want to trace this link, I want to get this data, etc. This is, I think, a great way to explore our APIs and jump around and see what's possible. This is probably what I recommend for the quick and easy way to get up and running. So again, to recap, go to fire.epic, create a free account, find an API, click try it, and then you can kind of intercept these parameters and try them on your own machine, as well as playing with them in the UI here. So that's a quick demo. Now I want to talk about the right way, or the more production-ready way to do the same thing. And this is basically replacing that steal the OAuth token from fire.epic.com, try it. And this is kind of our way to support your way to do this, the right way to get your own tokens. So here we have kind of what we call our client records. And the reasons these needs to exist is Epic needs to know about your app and know what information your app needs to be able to access. And we need to make sure that we're only releasing data to authorized applications. The way that we track that and handle that is using the OAuth 2 specification, as well as client records created in Epic system. And I'll show you how to create those on the Epic website, which you can do on your own without having to, again, self-service is our focus here. So a bit on the OAuth 2 standard. So OAuth 2 is a technical specification that defines how a data owner or a trusted application acting on their behalf can grant access to sensitive data through APIs. So in this case, we've got a patient, and they are working with a health app that is reminding the patients when to take their meds. As a patient, you are presented with a screen like this in my chart that says, are you consenting to sharing your data with my health manager, which is our example app here. So the patient is clicked accept here, agreed to share data. The mechanism that happens in the background here is your app gets an access token, that bearer token, and that allows you to hit our APIs and basically action this permission that the user has granted you. I'll do a quick explanation on 3 different OAuth 2 contexts and where they might make sense. So we've got 3 examples here. First is the patient context. That is like the last example where I showed where you as a patient are logging into our patient app and releasing data to a third-party app. We also have clinician or staff OAuth 2 contexts, which is a similar idea, but instead of a patient launching out of a patient app, it is, for example, a scheduler launching out of Epic to work with a third-party scheduling system. That OAuth access is related to that clinician's role in access. And then we also have what we call a backend app context, and this is more for system-to-system communication. For example, you might have a system that is streaming back vitals to Epic system. That is a system-system interaction. It's important to differentiate these because it determines both what data we show on the outgoing side and how we treat incoming data on the incoming side. For example, we might show you different data if you're a patient versus a clinician. We might have more patient-friendly names in our patient APIs for lab results, for example. And then for incoming data, we'll treat vitals inserted by the patient or meds inserted by the patient as different, and we'll show them in the user interface as this was patient entered. And that will show up differently than, for example, a clinician or a staff, a nurse entering vitals. And that will go directly to the chart. And the last thing I'll mention here is it's not uncommon for you or your app to have more than one of these at once. As an example, we've got implementations with what we call remote patient monitoring apps. This is connected with something like a patient blood glucose monitor. So on that side, you might have a patient API or a patient OAuth 2 context where you as a patient are logging in, reviewing the readings. Maybe you can enter supplemental information to be shared with your doctor. We might have those vitals being streamed from the continuous glucose monitor into Epic system in a backend interaction. This goes continuously without the user being involved. And then you also might have something on the clinician side where they can look at all of their users that are, or all of their patients that are embedded in or enabled in the patient monitoring program, can monitor their patients from a high level as a clinician wants to do. So your app could have multiple of these. So I'm going to show a quick example here of what an app registration looks like so that you can get up and running quickly on your side. So I'm going to quickly open up the, I'm going to get an in private window here so that I can not have it log into my side, and I can show you kind of what the app registration looks like. So again, from your side, I'll go to fire.epic.com. I think here it's already logged in from my last account, but you can make an easy account here. Same API as you're used to, but here we want to go to the build app side. I've made a previous app that's just JEP, my initials test app. And this is basically the guts of what you'll create on the client record side. This is enabled for self-service by you. And you will basically say, here is my app name. Here's, for example, some of my URLs. And then also, what are the APIs that I would like to enable to have my client, or for my client to have access to? So here I've taken patient search and observations. I've added those into the scope that are available in this client because that is what I think my app will use. I also have a quick redirect URL. So this is for the OAuth 2 flow. More information in this tutorial on how the OAuth 2 specification works. But this redirect URI is the last step of where we send back the token. Localhost is a simple way to get up and running, but if you want to have production ready, it should be a real endpoint that is reachable by Epic systems. But localhost is usually enough to get up and running quickly. There's tutorials here that I recommend reading into and how to get this working. Here we have other information about your app. Most of this information is required for production, but not for just getting up and testing. Important things here are have a redirect URL, have some APIs available, and then note down this non-production client ID because this will be important when you're connecting with Epic in the OAuth flow. The important thing for getting up and running here is to click Save and Ready for Sandbox. This will make this app available, I think, in about a business day or quicker if we get a guy to click a button. And this will basically make your app available for doing your own version of the OAuth flow and following this tutorial to get your own tokens instead of stealing them from Fire.Epic. I'm not going to go to all those steps here today because we've got good tutorials. But the idea here is to create a client record, create where you want, what APIs you have available. Remember your client IDs for non-production. That is what we'll be using for sandbox environments. And once you've got that, you can get up and running and start working through all of our different tutorials, depending on which use cases make sense for your app. So I'm not going to go through all the OAuth tutorial steps here, but if you follow the tutorial, they should get you through a lot of the details. There's some complexity here, so read through. If you've got questions, let me or Sean know. But that's kind of the open bit. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna mention, Josh, we did get a question in the chat from Yari who asked, is it the same app requirements for all roles, whether it's patient facing, staff facing, or backend?
It will look like the same screen. There's some slightly different settings, but I think a lot of it's the same. So for example, I think our OAuth flow looks different from the client side. So if you flip over to, or our OAuth flow looks different from the backend side. So if you flip over to backend, you'll get some different sets of URLs here. So the fields look a little different, but I think the guts are the same, to answer your question. But it will kind of sort you to the right things if you click, basically. Am I looking for a patient context? Am I looking for a clinician context or a backend context? You might end up doing this in multiple times if you've got an app that surfaces to patients and providers. And for those cases, you'll need to create a separate app for those different use cases. Anyways, the main step for getting up and running and testing is to click Save and Ready for Sandbox. If you do this before the hackathon, you'll have a chance for our nightly batch to catch this and put it in the environment that you can test with in Fire.Epic. So I recommend doing this early, at least a day before you want to start getting testing. We'll try to run the sync more frequently, but best case scenario is just do this quick registration the day before, add a bunch of APIs, and then you'll be up and running. So that's a quick explanation about how to register an app. And then lastly, I just want to get into a few different tips for working with Epic customers. So a couple things here in order to, let's see, I'm imagining your app has been tested, you know it works in our sandbox, and you want to try to get customers to, Epic customers to deploy your app. A couple of things to remember. So it's really important to involve customer operations and IT teams early in the project. And the customer staff can talk to the right, or to get involved with the right Epic representatives, including myself if you're working with Apotti, in order to figure out basically which teams do we need to make you successful, not just from the in-or-out team, but I mentioned the scheduling cases earlier. You probably need to talk to our scheduling team to figure out how that interacts with other APIs.
Josh?
So yeah, go ahead.
Can I have a question?
Yeah, of course.
Do you have a screening process for the apps similar to any app store? or
Not
do
really.
you
It's
just
not. It's not.
let
Yeah.
us to publicize the app?
So it basically it will go on a showing. We don't run a formal app store. So we have basically you'll send these apps up to our list of apps, and then from the customer side, they can request to pull the apps down. I think we have some basic like terms of use and rules of the road, which are treat our data properly, but we don't run a heavy app review process for your app to be available in the first place. We do
Okay.
have additional tiers for getting into our like showroom or more of our like featured integrations, but for the basics of getting up and running, you should just be able to do this. And I don't think we run heavy screening on this, but of course it depends probably.
We had another question in the chat,
Yeah.
Josh. Katya asked, is it more complex to have a back-end app to feed in data, for example, blood glucose?
Yes. Well, okay. Yes, acknowledging your question. I think to reference the earlier question, I think the depends on the use case, what technology makes sense. I think for back-end apps, I'd have to double check, but I think for blood glucose, we have incoming event-driven interfaces that will file this data. I also think we have a Fire API for observation.create that we might use for blood glucose. I think it's probably a back-end app, but I'd want to learn more about the use case to say for sure. I think the difference with the back-end app is basically it's a system-to-system communication. So we give your rights to you as a system, not a system working for a specific patient. So there's considerations there in what are we authorizing your system as a whole to do. Get those questions?
Yeah, I think that was good. And there's one more question.
Yeah.
Jaakko asked, do you support embedding patient portal functionalities in an app or internal browser? If so, do you support deep links, hiding duplicate navigation, etc.? I can answer that one. I think not necessarily the same space that Josh has been covering in more detail, and more, I would say, combination of integration and interoperability, but also more of a sort of feature of extensibility, for example, of the MISA mobile app or website. There are extensibility capabilities, for example, embedding an external page within the frame of the MISA site or app, or MyChart, more broadly, sort of any MyChart implementation of Epic. That is part integration. For example, if then within that embedded site or page you wanted to have sort of an integration with the Epic or MyChart instance, that would be kind of the integration pieces that Josh has focused. But that extensibility piece is more of a application build side item, and I don't think correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but for example, the open.epic MyChart instance has access to go in and, for example, build out a deep link to an embedded site, or a deep link out of that MyChart example. So I don't think, at least in this context, the open.epic sandbox would be a great fit for showing an embedded flow. But some of those capabilities do exist within Epic. So partial answer to your question. Yes, we have tools that align with that, but I don't think the open.epic sandbox will be a great fit for highlighting that type of extensibility, but great for highlighting an integration example.
So yeah, I think I'll answer first from the what is Epic capable of question, and then second, what is our sandbox capable of? So what is Epic capable of? So what I'm going to mention here is we have this launching your app documentation, and this is at least the most recommended method is the Smart on Fire launch. So this is basically you're an Epic, you want to launch out to your application. with sort of like a single sign-on and also give your application context about the user session. This application can be launched in a separate browser. It can be launched like embedded in our application. I think we also have options for embedding it within the user application. That's what some of these best practices discuss here. So I think we've got the ability to like frame this in our client, frame it externally. I think a lot of that is going to determine on how best we want to make your app work for our customers. But I think a lot of the functionality should be covered by the smart launch scenario. I'm not totally sure about the deep links and depending on what you want to deep link to, but fundamentally we can host a browser with your app in it, and then what your app does is up to basically what you can do in a browser, and as well as with our APIs in the backend. I think from the sandbox side, we mainly have the APIs available in kind of like a server that you can query. I don't think we have a full user interface available for third parties to use. So our sandbox is mainly focused on querying our APIs as a computer client and not as a someone logging into the system. But I can follow up because I think we have something for like a test harness or something for Smart. So I can take that follow up because I think there's something more you can do that I can point you to. But
I understood. So you can extend MySA or MyChart with external websites, but not really the other way around. Include your pieces of your UI into another app. Then for that, we would need to recreate the UI in the app and use the APIs to get the data.
So basically, yeah, I think like you can run your app in a box in MyChart. Basically, we can give your app a box, which is basically a browser to run your app in within the MyChart context, or launch into a separate browser. But you're right that we won't be, or at least it will be up to the Epic organization to change how the MyChart works and how they display. But your app fits in a box, I think. It's probably your answer.
Yeah.
But
understood. Thanks.
Any other questions in the comments here?
None in the chat.
Okay. Cool. A couple more tips for getting up and running with Epic Apps. So like I said, mention involving customer operations and IT teams early so that you can make sure that the use case makes sense. There are many teams that could be relevant here. I think if you're starting with the integration person, they're probably going to pull in other people. There's a funny T-shirt that someone made. It was like, I had a meeting with Epic and all I got was 3 more meetings. So we'll help you find the right people if you ask for the help. Another thing to mention is each customer has their own instance of Epic, including Apotti, which has been heavily customized for the Finnish context. So expect differences and variations in specifically the mappable data elements, like medication codes are wildly different across locales. So a lot of the core structure will be the same and what you can expect from our FHIR APIs, but a lot of the codes and mapping tables, et cetera, will be different. So expect some variation there. And then lastly, we also have technology-specific app implementation briefs. I'm going to show the first example here, which is very similar to what we just mentioned here. And this is implementing a Smart on Fire EHR launch. This is what I was mentioning earlier, where basically this is how you launch from a user login session in MySA or Epic Hyperspace into your app, either embedding it or jumping out specifically into another browser. And this helps you not only figure out the technical pieces, but also what you need to tell the Epic customer to be successful. I think this Hyperdrive test harness is the thing I was mentioning, where what kind of testing you can do at a Smart on Fire EHR launch. I'll send you some documentation after this, but I think that's available, or something like that is available on the sandbox side for you to test smart launches. But yeah, basically this helps you figure out like, how do I work best with an Epic customer once I know that my app works in the sandbox. We have these implementation guides for Smart on Fire, as shown here, backend OAuth 2. There's a bunch of interfaces that have this implementation detail that you can find on open.epic, as well as CDS hooks and Bulkfire also have this documentation. So that's pretty much what I got here. So just as a quick recap, Sean explained our data sharing philosophy and design. I explained a bit about how we think of the different tools in the toolkit. We switched number 2 and number 3. So first I kind of did the quick demo in the fire.epic.com with the try it and how you can get that working on your local machine. Then I showed kind of how do you register a client record so that you can basically do more of the flows on your side in more of a production ready way. And then lastly, some tips for working with Epic customers and eventually going live. And these map pretty well to the open.epic.com developer guide. So if you remember 2 things from this presentation, 1, look at fire.epic.com, and 2, look at open.epic.com. There's a lot of good information there that should help you get up and running. So that's what we got here. If you got questions, send them to Sean.
Yes, yeah, questions now to the hackathon or afterwards. I'm based here in Finland, so happy to help where I can or help connect to potentially other folks who can help. And that open@epic.com email is also something that's there to be public facing. If you run into questions with different APIs or questions, you can also try them and they'll get back to you. That's, I think, all we had to present, and we're coming up on time. I think wanted to open it up if there's any other questions about anything we discussed today or about the hackathon, let us know.
A question, yeah, one more. In that box that you described here, where you can run another app, can you also launch native apps and provide single sign-on to those with Smart on Fire?
So like a jump into another jump, basically?
Yes.
I think the answer is probably maybe, but that gets a little complicated. I think if you launch to an external browser, you can do anything a browser can do, and it's sort of up to your app in where you send the user in that browser experience. Because we can embed it, and we're, I think, in an embedded Chromium browser, and then you're kind of in a sandbox browser, and you can do whatever your app can do in a browser, including redirects and do single sign-on if you have the right info for it. If you also jump out to an external browser, then you can do anything that Chromium can do. So you might have more options there. I think it feels like in principle possible, but there might be some difficulties there. Go ahead.
But launch a native app with the launch URL. It doesn't open up in a browser, but it just launches another app installed on user's phone.
I see. I don't know about on the phone side. I've implemented such things on the Windows side, and I think in print I don't know about phone apps. I think that might be locked down by Apple and Google. But for example, on the Windows side, you can make a local script that launches a .exe. That turns it into a very client-focused workflow, meaning you need to make sure that all that app is available on all the clients you're planning to deploy to. But at least on the Windows .exe side, we've got support for that. I'm not sure about the the iPhone app side.
I think the Smart on Fire app launch does support that, but I would echo Josh's consideration highlighted. I think we can't guarantee that a second app is installed on the same device as the MyChart app that the user is interacting with. And so I expect there needs to be some handling of kind of a universal URL or however you are sort of directing that navigation to handle if the app is present versus not and considerations like that.
It's probably something we've got on the MyChart side, right? Like Open Outlook, for example.
Yeah, I think the other piece is certainly from a Smart on Fire standpoint, doing an SSO launch, I think is there are possibilities, particularly in Finland, where if, for example, both sides would normally authenticate under Suomi.fi. I think that opens up doors for that type of like SSO from MISA specifically to another app. Obviously, then we introduce kind of scalability considerations that, that same exact implementation won't apply outside of Finland for SSO, but I think a lot of sort of same technology considerations for SSO.
Okay. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for your questions. And I know we are at time, so I will go ahead and stop the recording, and this will be, I believe, put up on the Finnish Health Data Hackathon website, where it can be accessed. And definitely, again, feel free to email me any follow-up questions that arise as you're preparing for the hackathon or beyond. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.